else just to live, or where you go to the valley.
Hey, it is Independence Day.
So you can make choices.
I really like the Zoom.
Wow,
I
that's
know.
like
Getting dressed from the waist up. Great. Yeah. I do too. And it was a great thing that we had. I'm so grateful that we could do it. So, I just hate that Haven will get left out. But Haven is right. Oh, is she? And they try to and she was just she's a wonderful. She said, I can get off. That's a big deal. I got one summons for federal judge. In the process of moving. Well, this is the second time in 4 years she's been called.
So anyway, for some reason, they were going to bring them over for a tour. Well, I don't know, but anyway, they were going to bring them over for a tour.
Morning, Carl.
You don't want to do that because it's
How are you?
It's so great. They must be someone to change or something.
There you are. Okay, now you. Oh, great.
Looks like we're the only one.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I am sure.
Well, it just, every time we came by, I was afraid it was going to get knocked over.
Didn't see you on your daybed. I didn't see you on your daybed when I got up. I'm the only one on here.
How you doing? I'm good. How are you doing?
Looks like Elaine's teaching. Looks like you guys got through the house.
She's very efficient. Of course, which is what she would like us to be, but she was just friendly, and she said happy birthday to me. She's just great indeed. We could talk with him and practice with him. How to massage everything. Just a lot of different stuff. And he Texas practice songs and that's a good and we made a lot of pictures of this. I'll figure it out. I do think she figured it out because I told her. Oh, that's right. He said, you know where she is? And you certainly know where she is. She was right up there.
Miss talking. Jibber jabber before the meeting. Like I said, I'm the only one on Zoom. Last time was Harrington's and us, me. Huh? Sounds like it, looks like it. There's the Huskies, Hamiltons, Sandy. Haven't seen that. Oh, there's the Harringtons coming in.
But anyway, I saw her in and I didn't get it. So I got her back. So I got a lot of tissue. And I got that and she was taking those out. She was saying, "Oh, this is so great." So she was just going on the bank place. And there was a lot there. Beautiful black box. It went so well. I was so pleased. I had written a poem about it. Got like they're called menu cards, and she had a I went all out. Well, I had three. They were like, this one didn't work, and I had to go to so. I know the process. And it is a process. It's so wonderful. Just have to know you're going to go through the process. Well, I was just saying, when he gets to the other side of the process, it's going to be so good. But it takes, it takes a while to be I'm so grateful that I live in a time that when I go through the airport, I think, but you know, I would think there's so many those of us who are of a certain age. So good to see you. So good to see everybody in person. Still okay, or
he's faithfully working on 4th of July so that we don't have to break our backs this afternoon. How do you feel about the doors? Waiting on me, I bet you are.
Hi, Charles. How are you? It's good to see you.
You hear me?
How are you, Carl?
And you.
Good morning and happy 4th to everybody. Good to see all of you. especially we're glad to see Linda back in the flesh.
Yeah.
So it's good.
She looks so pretty.
Bob was here for church. His hands. I saw him over there. So that was great. All right, we got a long list of people that we need to find out about. Does anybody know any update on Becky Fretwell's sister?
I kind of do. Becky called me Thursday. Her sister is in tremendous amount of pain.
But she is in hospice, correct?
Yes, she's in
Becky's
hospice at home.
at home.
And so they are, yeah. So when she is in pain so much that she can't sleep, they have to call a hospice nurse. The hospice nurse comes out and helps get the pain down. But they are just overwhelmed with emotion, fatigue. It's just not good. So
Obviously Becky Fretwell, and Becky's trying to deal with her total shoulder replacement. So we're talking about Becky and her sister, and her sister's in hospice and in a lot of pain. I have a praise that Alva's brother Jerry got to go home yesterday afternoon. I put in the 5 stents and see you. So that's what they do. So I was telling his wife Loretta when we texted, I said, go home and rest. Rest.
How's Alva?
How is Alva? Alva is wishing his brain and his bladder would get it together. He can't. He said, my very big concern is if I come to church and I stand up to sing, that's it. So that's why you're not seeing Alva right now. Maybe next week. It's just gonna take a while. It's only been 2 weeks. So
It's a process.
yeah, it is a process. But the doctor warned him. It's like potty training a toddler on you're trying to potty train a 72-year-old. So our niece Angela, you may or may not have heard that she has breast cancer. And this is Jerry's daughter. And Alva had just talked to Jerry Thursday evening, and Jerry broke the news about Angela. And then Friday morning is when Jerry got carted off to the ER. So I'm sure a lot of this is stress. Unfortunately, heart trouble runs in the Bible family. So Alva's the only one that doesn't have stents. They didn't have stents when he did angioplasty. They just did angioplasty. Does anybody know anything about Mary Lou? Has anybody heard any update about Mary Lou? I'm assuming, last time we tried to call, we just got something, the message on the answering machine. So I'm assuming she's a lot better, and maybe she's over at her daughter's taking care of kids or something. Tom and Martha were here this morning. That was a praise. Tom looks great. He can't climb on monkey bars or anything, but he looks good. He looked great. And Martha, what I could tell, because of course she's wearing a mask, and masks don't do well with people that can't hear her well, but she looked good.
she was overjoyed to be here. She couldn't say hi without breaking out into tears. So she was just grateful to be here.
Today was an unusual day all the way around. Sandy, how are your eyes?
I got good news that it's just something that's going to take care of itself over time. We still don't know why the vision is diminishing, but the major concern is not an issue.
So that's praise.
It is,
Just hurry up, God. Let's get this.
please.
Elaine, how are your eye issues?
Not good. They're just, the doctor says, keep using the medicine. And I do, but I'm having trouble.
Does reading bother you that much?
I just have to be real careful about reading and not do too much at a time.
We had Sue Halliday's sister on prayer list last week. We have an update on Sue's sister.
Had company, so she's not here today. I think that's going to be an ongoing thing because she's deteriorating. I think it's mental as well as physical.
Okay, we got a good report about Linda. She's still doing well. Absolutely. That's scary, but we're thankful for that. How about Ken?
Ken's doing great. He's taking it easy going out because he doesn't want anybody bumping into him. So he falls, but half the time around the house, he's not even using his cane.
Good. That's fantastic. I was jealous. How about your friend Bruce?
Bruce is doing well. He's still undergoing treatment, and the results last time were excellent. He'll be doing another CAT scan, I think in 3 weeks. His biggest concern right now is he lost his hair. He's bald as a cue ball, and he had very thick wavy hair. But he says, that's okay, I'll deal with it.
It just looked like your Bruner.
Yeah,
Your Bruner was a hunk, right?
He was.
I talked briefly with Rudy about Carol's sister Connie. She's good days, bad days, right, Rudy? And Carol tries to go up, check on her sister. We were discussing the fact that this is going to be an ongoing thing. And, you know, as we age, how many times have we heard that? I talked to Gail briefly. She said she took Joe out yesterday. It wore him out. So he is home in bed, and I'm sure she obviously going to go home and check on him. Saw Karen today with their younger son, Eric. Looked really great. Eric lives in Cartersville, Georgia. He's trying his best to get up here more often, but I know that was a treat for Karen. Sarah has been staying with Karen this summer. And she's working. She's doing 2 jobs. Well, actually, she's doing 3. She's working with the youth. She's working at Cruise Farms, and she's working with a pizza, I guess, delivery or something. But Karen loves the fact that she's there with her, and you know, she's anybody that knows Sarah. She's sweet as she can be. So I know she's glad she's back from the trip. Has anybody heard? I assume the Puerto Rican trip was wonderful, but it had to be tiring to go and work like crazy and then get on a plane and get back. This Friday is Clyde Fry's birthday. I don't even know if some of you even know who Clyde Fry is. It has been so long since she's been here, but we need to remember her.
I talked to Betty Edwards this week because I usually try to call her occasionally, and she sounded depressed. And I said, well, Betty, you just need to come get with us where you'll be happy.
Yeah, I was hoping she'd be here today.
I thought she might be, but
I'm going to try to call her this week too and kind of, you know, because you can talk yourself into a lot of things and not good. If you haven't been to church, it was really interesting. It was great to see Thomas and Grace. Alta and I were your food people. We brought out the food, and I found Waywagon Lane, which is where they live, and the U-Haul truck backed up. Of course, they couldn't do a thing till they closed, but we brought in the lunch and hugged everybody, and everybody it was just wonderful to see them. So we're hoping that this all works out for Chase and for Dawn and for the whole church. We just all need to be supported.
Thank you for doing that for the class.
All I did was order. She did most of the cooking. She's the baker. Yeah. But it was hilarious because Alta wears hearing aids and I wear hearing aids. So here we're going down Maynardville Pike, and I'm going like this because I can't hear, and Alta's leaning like this because she can't hear me. And I said, if anybody saw us in the car, they'd probably think these 2 idiot ladies, what are they doing? We made it.
We
So.
need a vehicle with a bench seat. We can scoot close.
But it was good. I appreciate all that Alta and Nancy did. They're my unofficial food committee. Like I said, I guess you all think you've been drafted for life. But anyway, this too shall work out. Does anybody have any other announcements that we missed?
I have 3 observations. 4th of July, Independence Day, and the roach were gone from the pews.
Yes.
We have been freed.
Yes, I wanted to do a dance in the aisle.
Yes. Secondly, the first hymn you sang in worship service is God of the Ages, which in the very bottom I noticed is our national anthem. I didn't know we had a national hymn, a national hymn. So that. And thirdly, the class on the other side of this little class, I think it's Christian Home Builders or Christian Fellowship. Is it Home Builders? You know, for a long time, they were meeting in Wesley Hall, then they moved into the chapel. Well, they're back in their room today, and they are celebrating. So it is a day of freedom. So, in many ways.
Those are very good observations. Anything else that I've missed? Because I'm sure I've missed some things. Okay, well, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll pray that Elaine can see her lesson.
I'll give it my best shot.
Father God, we thank you so much for this day, for the ability, the liberty to get to come and worship you. And there's so many places on this earth where that is prohibited. We thank you for this class. We thank you for your blessings each and every day. You have heard our pleas. Some have not been heard, but you know them anyway. We're asking for your guidance. We're asking for your comfort. We praise you that you gave us your son. And all this I ask as we prepare our hearts for Elaine as she shares her heart with all of us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, you're on, dear.
This is the first Sunday, which is usually Lynn. So I can understand completely if you're disappointed and want to slip out and go down to the journey because it's going on right now. So that's a good thing. If you ever come and the person you don't want to listen to is teaching, you can slip right out and have somewhere to go. So today is Independence Day, and I've had a really busy week, but when I have a second to think about it, and I think about the ragtag Americans that were willing to give it their best shot, as I use that term, to go against this, English army dressed in red and having the perfect hats and all that stuff. And they did it. They did it. Think about that. I think that's our heritage, or a major part of our heritage, is to give it your best shot, even though at times it seems like maybe you could never succeed. And that's what the Americans, they weren't called Americans at that time, but what our forefathers did. And the 4th of July is when we celebrate our heritage, I suggest. All sorts of things. But it's a wonderful thing to think about living in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that lately we haven't had some really doozies of bad things that have happened. I finally have quit crying every time I see a video of January 6th. For the longest time, every time they would have it on the news, I would just have tears running down my face. I think I've gotten over that now, but I still think it was a terrible moment in our history. And I hope that that won't ever, nothing like that can ever happen again. Hope. Pray. Well, we are starting on a new unit today. You remember the 4 Sundays, or was it 5, 4 or 5 Sundays in June, that we talked about the story of Joseph, which we all know backwards and forwards, but it's such a fascinating story, and it has so many things to learn in it. So we did that during the month of June, and I enjoyed it myself, even though, you know, we've done it many times before. The second unit that we start today is about our neighbors. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word neighbor?
Next door.
What?
Next door neighbor.
Next door. I think of Mr. Rogers. I'm not kidding. Did you all ever watch Mr. Rogers? I watched it with Matt every day that I could, you know, I didn't have something I absolutely had to do. I watched it with Matt. And I actually think that I learned probably more from watching Mr. Rogers than Matt did. I loved Mr. Rogers, and I'm so sorry that he passed away. What a wonderful person. Because Mr. Rogers says, please, won't you be my neighbor? And what did he mean by neighbor? Did he mean that you lived next door to him? No, that's not what he meant. And all the different kinds of people that he would have on his show and call them neighbor. Come in, neighbor, he would say. And that's what our unit is going to focus on. Being a neighbor. And notice the, excuse me, I have to rub my eyes. To acknowledge the risk in loving our neighbor. Now, that's an interesting sort of twist on thinking about neighbors. The risk in loving our neighbors. Now, I hope y'all will admit that I don't read to you very often, except maybe from the passage. But this is the teacher edition, and it has what I think is a wonderful essay. Now, it has one every time we change units, but you know, I don't think I've ever read one to you before. But this one I thought was so good to help us get focused on, as a Christian, what does it mean to love your neighbor? But Mary, the name of the essay is The People Next Door. At its most basic level, a neighbor in the Old Testament is another member of the people of God, a fellow Hebrew. So think about that. At its most basic level, your neighbor was another Hebrew. I thought about that, you know, when I was growing up in Nashville, and particularly in Madison, which was a suburb north of Nashville. There was this huge, I don't remember how many members they had, they always bragged about it, but it was a Baptist church that was in Madison. And so most of our neighbors, as we think of them, the people who live close around us, were Baptist. And they thought that we were sort of weird because we were Methodists. But my mother was so loving of all kinds of people that she usually was able to work through that. As such, a neighbor is to be treated with respect, subject to the same treatment that one would wish to receive were the tables turned. This understanding of neighborliness is fixed firmly in Israel's moral code, the Mosaic Law. It is neatly summarized as the command to love your neighbor as yourself. And I want you to, stop and think about that really for a minute. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, that's pretty difficult to do, isn't it? Pretty difficult to do. I would say, I'm just speaking for myself. It is neatly summarized as the command to love your neighbor as yourself, itself an exalted reminder to bear with others as graciously as God has already borne with you. I remember, I think I've told you many times before probably, that my dad we had a fairly large yard, particularly in the backyard. And my daddy always planted a really substantial vegetable garden way in the back. And he worked on it so much. And we all did. My mother loved to go out and pick the vegetables in the morning that were ready to be picked. And my mother made canning. She canned things, but mostly she froze vegetables that we could have, later in the winter or whatever. But it was a big thing with my family. Well, some people moved in next door, and they were lovely people. And the man was a football coach at the local high school. Of course, my dad was so interested in football, all of us were. But I don't really know where the water came from, but there was water that came through their yard, our neighbor's yard. And they put up a metal piece on their fence. I'd say it was about that big, all the way down their fence, which meant that all the water went into my daddy's vegetable garden. Well, of course, your vegetable garden has to have water, but it doesn't have to have standing water all the time. And I remember, I guess I was maybe 13, something like that. I remember saying to my daddy, I've told you I've always been interested in the law. And I said to my daddy, can't you, my daddy had talked with him about it. And they said that was their business. It was their side of the fence that they put the metal up, so forth. And so I remember saying to my daddy several times, why don't you sue them? Because that's not fair. That's not, I feel sure that's not legal. It isn't legal. I didn't think it was. I didn't have Google to look it up to see then, but I felt sure it wasn't legal for somebody to do that. And so I remember thinking, why doesn't my daddy sue them? And then I remember my daddy saying, he called me Bit. He said, Bit, we're our neighbors. And Jesus told us to love our neighbors as ourselves. I thought of that all week long as I studied the lesson. This understanding of neighborliness elevates the static noun neighbor. The neighbor is a noun that has many parts to it, transforming it into a dynamic verb. Thus, being a neighbor is not contingent on determining that certain definable actions are present in another before being willing to treat that person as a neighbor. Instead, the way one behaves toward others is the primary means one has of proving that neighborliness is an integral part of one's own character. I think I've mentioned to you that back behind where we lived, oh, y'all help me, maybe in the senior moment. Coal miner's daughter, Loretta Lynn. Loretta Lynn and her family lived in a house back behind us. That was when Loretta was just getting to be famous. And then later, when they made the movie Coal Miner's Daughter, they actually used that house to film in. And I remember that my mother, it's all the people up there, you know, on the cameras and da-da-da-da, that my mother made sandwiches and lemonade and took it up there to the people who were up there filming. Now, you know that a movie set has a catering truck there to feed everybody. Couldn't really see it because it had been set up in the front yard. And my mother couldn't see that it was there. So she took sandwiches and lemonade up to, who played
Sissy Spacek.
Sissy Spacek. And my mother did talk to Sissy Spacek. Sissy Spacek was sort of amazed, I think, my mother said, that anybody would do that kind of thing, you know? So my mother said, well, I'm going to leave the sandwiches and lemonade. If the catering truck runs out of food, then y'all have something to eat. My mother also, later on, after we were all gone and she lived there alone, she started being neighborly to someone who was who did scams, and my mother got scammed for a couple of $100 because she didn't realize. At the same time, because the law was understood to reflect the character of God, there was within the law the awareness that its dictates had application outside Israel too. True, there was no sense that non-Hebrews could be expected to conform to the wisdom of Israel's law, but that in no way was to stop God's people from extending God's grace to whomever they encountered. I'm sure that you have many memories of seeing someone be neighborly, someone they don't know, like you're at the grocery store and the person in front of you is $5 short to pay their bill, and you just hand them a $5 bill. I've seen that type of thing a number of times. And I think that people of East Tennessee, because, I'm sure it's because of lots of things, but I also think it's because of their Scottish heritage. Scottish people are very generous. Now, you think of Scottish as being saving money, being stingy. That is not true. Scottish people do save their money, but they save it to be nice to other people. Thus, the command to love neighbors was to be extended without condition or question. Now, listen to this. Was to be extended without condition or question to immigrants as well as one's fellow Hebrews. Do we have that problem in our country today? And I think in many cases, we do extend to immigrants, and a lot of people don't like that at all. I think that's the wrong thing to do. Jesus picked up on this broad understanding of the Mosaic Law. He sure did. If you think of all I was talking to, I think it was Randy Fry that I was talking to about this, about how many times Jesus says, be kind to the poor. Be kind to the women who have lost their husbands. Be kind to people who are hungry for whatever reason. And Randy said, I've never counted that up, but I probably someday when I don't have much to do, I probably need to count that up. Because it's a lot of times that Jesus said that, and it's something very important to him. Quite present, meaning the Mosaic Law, quite present in first century Jewish teachings, and agreed that all God's people should always intend to be good neighbors. Should intend to be good neighbors. But that's not just to the people who live around you, live near you. And in the capable hands of the Apostle Paul, the entire law is said to be fulfilled whenever one loves one's neighbor as oneself. Well, Paul did summarize it up very nicely in a few words, but he said something that we were to do that's quite difficult. Think back to my dad, who could have definitely sued, and I think won his case about the neighbor putting the metal and the water going everywhere. He didn't do it. And I remember, I can hear him saying it, you all. Jesus told us to be good to our neighbors. That was just a very short sentence that he said to me. But I can hear it. The first time he said that to me, I thought, well, that's really stupid. He needs to think about that some more. You know how teenagers think about their parents. Well, that's really stupid. That's just a teenage thing. But then now when I think back to it, and it was the lesson that he was teaching me, I praise the Lord for that. Praise the Lord for it. While there have always been and still are attempts made by God's people to restrict the command to be a neighbor to a controllable subset of people. Think about that, a subset of people. Do you want to make your neighbors all the people who go to Fountain City United Methodist?
I'll get it for you.
All the people who live in Fountain City?
Go on upstairs if you want to.
All the people who are parents of your children's friends. Lots of different ways to make a subset. There have always been attempts by God's people to restrict this command, love your neighbor as yourself, to be a neighbor to a controllable subset of people, such as one's friends. I don't know if you all ever go much over to Merchants Road, but and you all may know more about this than I do, but it is really upsetting to me when I go over there. I go over there sometimes to get, I love Starbucks coffee, and I sometimes go over there to get a Starbucks of a morning, and the homeless people that are in that area are our neighbors. They're our neighbors. No, they don't have a house and they don't live near you as far as being in a subdivision or something, neighborhood. But they're living over there with children and babies. I've seen a couple that has a baby, seen them over the last few months. I mean, an infant. And back in the winter when it was so cold, goodness. And I'll be honest, I should have done more than I did. When I studied this lesson this week, I thought, the mother and father with the baby, I should have done something about that. I gave them, I think it was a $10 bill. That's all I had as far as bills on me. I think I gave them a $10 bill to get some food, but that didn't keep them from being very, very cold that evening. If I want to say, well, you want to say, oh, it's just a homeless person. You don't have to do anything about that. You can make them a subset very easily. However, Jesus was clear. Now listen carefully, you know this, but I just want to say it to you again. If only the people you're willing to love are those already loving you, think about that. You're only willing to love those already loving you. Think about those homeless people over there in the area of Merchants Road. No, they don't even know me. They don't love me. So they're a subset that I just ignore or try to ignore. Jesus said, and he was clear about it, if the only people you're willing to love are those already loving you, and this last part is tough. You are, for all intents and purposes, no different from a pagan. Ugh. Sort of kicks you in the stomach, doesn't it? If you're only willing to love people who love you, you are, for all intents and purposes, no different I'm a pagan. The 4 lessons in this unit explore the concept of neighbor from several perspectives. The first lesson gathers various verses. I didn't really get to the Proverbs part. Verses from Proverbs. Don't withhold good from someone who deserves it when it's in your power to do so. Don't say to your neighbor, go and come back, I'll give it to you tomorrow, when you have it right there. You could give it then. Don't plan to harm your neighbor who trusts and lives near you. Don't accuse anyone without reason when they haven't harmed you. When you read Proverbs, let me say it this way. When I read Proverbs, it almost gives me cold chills to think that these things are just said straight out. And how many of them have I not followed? How many? You go all the way, this is in chapter 3 of Proverbs. And you skip on over to the 25th chapter, verse 21. If your enemies are starving, feed them some bread. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. And the Lord will reward you, skipping on down. And the key verse, don't say to your neighbor, go and come back, I'll give it to you tomorrow when you have it. And then getting back to that's the first lesson. The second lesson, using a passage from the book of Ruth, invites us to think about what it means to be a neighbor to immigrants. Have you ever thought about the book of Ruth being about immigrants? I don't know that I ever did think about it until, within the last few years. The third lesson looks at the book of Acts for how the early church leaders incorporated neighborliness into the church's structure. And so it should still be certainly a part of our structure. And the fourth lesson takes us to Mark's gospel for an example of 4 individuals who were true neighbors to a man in need. I ask you to think about this week, who are your neighbors? And what have you done for them when they needed help? Do you take sandwiches and lemonade to a film star? That's what my mother did. Do you go past a homeless person that obviously needs something, and you try to look the other way so you act like you don't see them? I'm admitting that I have done that. When they have a sign, that says something like that, you just ignore it. Those are our neighbors. And Jesus, as this passage, this essay says, Jesus picked up on the broad understanding of the Mosaic law, quite present in first century Jewish teachings, and agreed that all God's people should always intend to be good neighbors. And as Paul rewrote it, love your neighbor as yourself. Hope you'll think about that this week. And Lynn will be back next week. She She always tickles me. I can't remember exactly what she said, but this has been several years ago. She asked me if I would substitute, and I said, oh, of course. And she said, you know, I have to go with Don. He's going to speak about save the whales or save the butterflies. I can't remember what it is he's going to talk about, but if you would substitute for me, I'll be glad. And I said, I'd be glad. Lynn is such a precious person. Whenever I tell people that Lynn and Don are in my Sunday school class, I always go, really? Really? I'm not so sure that Lynn doesn't do for her neighbors, large meaning, as much as Don does, but Don certainly does do a lot for people, and I'm grateful for that.
I think a real test of a neighbor, this is my observation, is an ambulance. When you see an ambulance, I know it's the law, you're supposed to get out of the way, but have you noticed how many people don't get out of the way lately? And if the roles were reversed and you were in the ambulance or someone you loved was in the ambulance, you'd want people to get out of the way. I think, and just traffic is an example of how you can be a neighbor. How many times have you seen someone trying to turn left across 2 lanes of traffic, and it takes forever for 2 drivers to agree to stop to let that person go through? I think traffic and how we drive and how we react to traffic is a very good indication of what kind of neighbor we might be.
If you stop, the person behind you might shoot you.
Well,
you slow them down.
right. And I will also say, every time you see an ambulance and you get out of the way, pray. Pray. You don't know what that's. We saw a children's hospital ambulance heading down Interstate 40 toward Children's Hospital, and started to pray and started to weep because a child in an ambulance, you don't know what's happening or why, but you don't need to know. You just say, pray. That to me, traffic is the biggest indicator of what kind of neighbor you are.
I'll just say in that situation, Lord, you know what I need to be saying. Please hear it from me.
Exactly. And get out of the way.
I mean, people that get road rage, I have a hard time loving them. I know Jesus said I should, but I have a hard time loving people who get road rage. That seems so. Shall I say the word stupid again? Anyway, that's the end of my lesson, Larry. If you would close our class with prayer today, would you mind doing that?
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day when we celebrate the United States of America. Thank you for the principles of liberty and justice for all. We realize, Lord, that we don't meet these standards when we don't love our neighbor as ourselves. Help us to do that. Help us to do your will. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Have a good week. I want to hope everybody has a good Fourth. That's right.
He doesn't do
Elaine will be here next week.
That's right. Thank you.
You didn't tell me, so that's all right. That's okay. I don't know if Chase is coming or not.
We're supposed to bring chairs.
Yes, please, yes.
Pretty much what this mental stuff is.
I'm with you about the trash.